When Covid-19 struck Kenya back in March 2020, those who were first diagnosed with the disease not only had to contend with battling a virus that was then relatively unknown to them, but also the media coverage and speculation surrounding the whole situation. My name is Timothy Otieno, and we're about to meet the first patients of Covid-19 as they tell us their journey 1 year later. It takes you just about 5 minutes off Magadi Road to get to these apartment buildings somewhere in Rongai, Kajiado County. It is here that I meet 29-year-old Brian Orinda, who leads the quiet, unassuming life of a typical Kenyan youth trying to make ends meet. But exactly 1 year ago, Brian's life was totally different.
The Ministry of Health has confirmed the first coronavirus case in Kenya.
That announcement ushered in weeks of tension and turmoil, which to this day the country is yet to fully recover from.
You're no longer number one, now we can call you Brenda.
Patient zero was 26-year-old Ivy Brenda Cherotich, who claimed that she got the virus during a layover flight in London on her way to Kenya from the United States. But at the time of the announcement, her identity remained unknown. But in this house in Rongai, panic had already begun to set in. Brenda had interacted with Brian and a group of 5 other friends before she felt unwell and availed herself for testing.
So I started feeling unwell, but I dismissed.
Immediately Brenda's status was known, contact tracing was done, and Brian made the list. Evans Odhiambo, who also lived in the house, remembers vividly events of the day leading up to a 2-week quarantine that changed his life forever.
So when I came back home, I was told a few of my friends had been taken to Mbagathi for the COVID testing. Actually, I wanted kujificha because, but then I never did that.
6 of the house occupants were tested that day, and only 1 sample turned out positive.
Actually, the nurse mwenye alikuja akaniambia I'm positive. Venye aliniambia I'm positive kwanza, I didn't even respond to her. Nili drift off kidogo, alafu ndo akaniuliza, "We Brian, nini mbaya?" So nilikuwa naamka asubuhi, naenda online, I'm seeing this news. There's so many deaths. I was wondering sasa ama leo ndo siku ya mwisho.
It would take another 2 weeks before Health Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe revealed their identities to the public. At that time, both Brenda and Brian had already tested negative to Covid-19 twice.
Some very special guests.
Fast forward to 1st of April, and the two would meet President Uhuru Kenyatta through a virtual conference organized by the Ministry of Health. Brenda spent 17 days in isolation, while Brian was under quarantine at the Kenyatta National Hospital for 15 days. His roommates suffered the same fate at a time when the virus spelled doom, horror, and stigma, as it still seems to do.
Scary. Yeah, it was scary.
Both Brian and Evans were present when a few patients in desperation and distress scaled the walls of Mbagathi Hospital and fled.
Ukifinyiwa somewhere, of course, and you're used to freedom so much, yeah, most definitely utafeel. There's that kind of feeling unataka tu kuhepa somewhere.
But patient 3 now reflects upon that time and draws from it a lot of lessons. In his first ever media interview since a diagnosis that thrust him into the national spotlight, Brian, who mainly works online, says the experience taught him to be a better individual.
Imenifanya nimejaribu to get more in touch with my family. Imenifanya nimekuwa a bit more, nimejaribu to get closer to God kidogo.
Right now, I want to hand over to my colleague, senior reporter Rita Tinina, with more. Rita?
Thank you, Timothy. I follow up your story with a tale of the agony of the loss and unsaid goodbyes for the families of Kenya's first COVID-19 fatalities. At Gotngoche village in Migori, Moses Osoro Ogola's family gathers to celebrate his life, something his wife Paulina Tieno has wanted to do since he died and was hurriedly buried as a COVID-19 suspected case 7 months ago.
Sijui nikifanya hiyo nitakuwa relieved because all the time in my heart naonaga kama nilimtupa.
After spending 2 nights at the Mater Hospital, where he had been admitted over low oxygen levels in the blood, 61-year-old Moses Ogola died on the 1st of August last year. His wife Pauline was not allowed to view his body. And sad as that was, it was just the beginning of her ordeal.
I requested, can I give you my husband's suit? You dress him. I cannot bury him naked. They told me, Mama, once somebody is dead of COVID, we spray them and we wrap them, there's nothing we can do. So my husband was buried like that, without anything.
When the family traveled from Nairobi to Migori for the burial,
When we arrived at home, I got a very big lorry for the police, full. I stopped and asked them, you guys, why are you here? A full lorry to come and guard me not to enter my home? This cannot happen. Can this thing go out? Because it was not fair. The way we were being treated, it was like people are just seeing death in news. You are just like a curse.
Ogola's burial was attended by less than 15 people, and just like for many COVID-19 cases at the time, was rushed by health personnel clad in PPEs who handled the body and fumigated surroundings. The family was to start facing real stigma when they returned to Nairobi.
Now it was, the estate should be fumigated. That court should be fumigated. The children, because I have a small boy who is 10 years, who goes to play with the others outside, they were being told, don't play with this kid because the father died of corona, not to bring corona.
Some of those she considered friends abandoned her.
Watu wakikaa na wewe usifikiri ni marafiki zako. Wengine si marafiki zako. Your true friends will come. I've known my true friends. And they are very few and I'm shocked.
The mother of 3 decided to grieve her own way, and remarks by those who did not understand her hurt her even more.
Ukikaa, you think. So what I opted to do, anything I thought I wanted to do, maybe to do in my home, nilifanya, to make myself busy. Saa hizo nilikuwa na make myself busy, ndio isikuje kwa akili. Saa hizo ninafanya hizo, I'm hurting, watu wengine wanasema, Pauline is celebrating the husband's death. So you wonder, what type of life is this? I celebrate my husband's death, and they don't know the pain we are going through. You know, I have children. If I'm not strong, my children will break. I have 3 children. Nikaona, nikifanya kazi, at least during the day I'm busy. Nikienda kulala, hata nikilia kwa bedroom yangu, watoto hawanioni.
Since her husband died, she has not set foot in church. The family worships online.
But I feel like I want to go to church, but there's that fear. I fear if I go, by any chance, somebody gets corona, will people say I'm the one who brought this corona?
The government gave daily briefings on the COVID-19 situation in the country, and there is one statement Pauline says still hurts to date.
The way Kagwe relayed the message to Kenyans. I thought it was wise for him to verify. When he gets news, when he receives news, at least he needs some verification before he goes live on air. Because he was saying, somebody came from Nairobi, went and infected the mother and 48 people in the village, which was a lie. And that thing really hurts me to date.
Elsewhere in Siaya, the family of James Oyugi is yet to overcome last year's harrowing experience. His body was infamously tossed into a shallow grave in the dead of night.
Yale yalifanyika hayakufanyika vizuri kibinadamu, ni kama tulifanyiwa unyama.
Celine Oyugi is still convinced that her husband did not die of COVID-19. And just like Pauline, her family still faces stigma 10 months later.
Yani tunabaguliwa. So tumeishi kwa machungu. Unaamka na uchungu, unashinda na machungu, unalala na machungu. Kwa sababu watu wakikuangalia wanaona corona.
Oyugi was the sole breadwinner for his family of 2 wives and their children. Life, they say, is a struggle.
Watoto wangu wanatembea mpaka Ukwala. Footing. Watoto wa James wanatembea mpaka Ukwala. Kitu ambao hawakuwahi kuona wakati mwingine kwa sababu ya kifo ya baba yao.
Quite sad. I hope one day they find peace and closure. It is now time for health and science reporter Saada Hassan tracking COVID-19 in the country.
Thank you, Rita. Up next, we track the pandemic 1 year down the line. I take a look at what has transpired in the country since day one and where we are now. The country experienced drastic changes. Directives requiring all Kenyans to wear face masks would be announced, failure to which one would pay a fine of 20,000 shillings. Entry into and out of the country was highly monitored, and eventually flights were cancelled as movements in and out of some towns like Nairobi were restricted.
There will be a daily curfew.
Normally when you have a pandemic of this nature, the border points are critical. The entry points. Are you checking who is coming in? Are you testing them? So that was very important.
By this time, the country was ill-prepared, limited testing capacity, few isolation centers, medical oxygen and personal protective equipment for its health workers.
March 17th, WHO actually issued a statement saying they had developed kits that were to be distributed to 40 countries, and Africa was among those countries which were supposed to receive those kits. These were PCR kits and they're supposed to be used in the reference lab.
Counties were put on notice to speed up their preparation with a target of 300 isolation beds each.
In early February, the gold standard for managing a positive case was you kept them in isolation until you tested 2 tests that were negative. And some people would say in isolation for 6 weeks because they kept testing positive. But then by May, there was a new guideline that said, as long as they have been symptom-free from the first test to 14 days, you can release them.
In April 2020, the Ministry of Health released burial protocols which limited the interaction between the dead and those handling the body, including relatives. The country witnessed the deceased being buried hurriedly, stuffed in body bags with burial rites as they knew it being altered.
At the point that we were starting to understand the pandemic, the science around infectiousness of a dead body to the people, the science around how to handle that and to avoid infection was not very clear. Because if you do something and then it comes out later that dead bodies were highly infectious, then you'd regret having lost lives. So at that point it was necessary.
Kenya's COVID-19 curve was not flattening. So far, more than 1,800 deaths have been recorded. August 2020, which was around the first peak of the pandemic in the country, saw at least 97 people succumbing to the virus. In September, the curve dipped and the lowest number of deaths were 18 within that month. During the second peak, the highest recorded number of deaths, 157, was witnessed on November 16th. The curve dropped down in the following weeks. However, from February 2021, the numbers seem to be rising once again. Kenya's challenge, however, was not only on treatment, but also on testing and diagnosis. In the beginning, the country shipped samples to South Africa since it did not have the capacity to test. And despite building capacity to over 40 laboratories, how the samples were collected, from whom, and the turnaround time for results raised queries, some still unanswered to date.
Qualitatively, we are not getting good data. In other words, what we have been seeing right from the time when we started this pandemic, even in our lab, I cannot say the data speaks for the whole country, because these are people who either come because they are sick, or because they have been referred by doctors, or because they are traveling. So there is a bias.
The number of positive cases recorded from tested samples hit high during the peak periods. July-August was Kenya's first peak, before a lull in September and early October. However, around mid and end of October, the numbers rose, peaking in October-November. Kenya's already ailing health system will be challenged. Years of insufficient resources that has the sector heavily reliant on donations and donor funding will haunt the country.
The health system should not be financed from the top. It needs to be financed within itself by decentralizing the financing all the way to the facility, so that the facility, the hospital itself, knows we've run out of masks, we need to purchase, not waiting to be delivered a consignment.
Dr. Kalebi thinks that the worst is over and it's now a matter of being vigilant to prevent the new mutations from getting and spreading in the country.
For sure, the number of people who have been infected in the community is now more than 40–50%.
There's somebody who said that in a pandemic, everything you do seems to be unwarranted, but in retrospect, everything you did seems to have been inadequate.
Now that you're caught up, I hand you over to Timothy Otieno. Keep on watching COVID at 1.
Thank you very much, Saada Hassan, for that one. Now, 1 week after the first case of COVID-19 was recorded in the country, and many towns across the nation became virtual ghost towns following implementation of restriction of movement of persons occasioned by COVID-19. Now, we want to take a look back at how many urban centers in the country became ghost towns. March 26th would be the turning point in Kenya's quest to try and contain the virus. It's the day that the first COVID-19 related death was reported in the country. A 66-year-old Kenyan businessman who had traveled from Eswatini through South Africa succumbed to the virus at a Nairobi hospital. And just 24 hours later, the state would announce restrictions of movement and containment measures. Nairobi and all towns as we knew them would become ghost towns. Movement of people was restricted and businesses were to close down by 7 p.m. across the country. It's a directive that would see the often bustling nightlife at the country's capital brought to a halt. An eerie silence enveloped Nairobi. On the 6th of April, cessation of movement in Nairobi County was declared, with a similar directive for Kwale and Kilifi counties to take effect just 2 days later. The cessation of movement would not be lifted until July the 6th, a day which also saw the gradual reopening of places of worship.
Unaweza kukunywa pombe, sawa?
But in Kenya, the struggle to contain the pandemic was never an easy task. Commercial centers were deserted, almost turning an otherwise vibrant city into a ghost town. During this entire period of uncertainty, however, there was one beneficiary: the environment. Scientists say that the lack of pollution and interference saw Mother Nature breathe, improving her quality immensely. Research indicates that there was a 500% decrease in sewage and industrial pollution into rivers globally, while noise levels reduced from 68% to 35% within the months of May and August 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic was at its peak. Now, from covering ghost towns to celebrating COVID-19 heroes, my colleague Beldin Waleaula has more. Beldin, who are we celebrating?
Tonight, we celebrate the pandemic heroes, the frontline health workers. I spoke to the unsung heroes who braved the virus and numerous challenges to ensure Kenyans still received medical care.
So the samples will be taken to the lab direct to molecular lab where they are done.
A year ago, I met Joseph Ondioki, a lab technician and wellness manager at the pathologist Lancet in Nairobi. At that time, everyone was afraid, and he had moved out of his home to protect his family.
We were scared. Today we are scared. We are human beings, and personally I'm scared. As we are talking, I don't stay with my family.
A year down the line, as I catch up with him, he tells me his fears of contracting the virus came to pass.
Basically, I didn't have any symptom at all. It wasn't a good experience, of course. And I kept on engaging the Ministry officials because they were calling up and following the situation. But then within 14 days, I was up and about.
So far, the experience has not been that rosy, he says.
People knew that these guys are dealing with the virus, and therefore they will not want to mix. Our kids will not freely mix with kids within where we stay. But now, I think people have accepted.
He is glad that he is now back with his family after months of isolation from them.
This time, from September, we had to reorganize our compound, and I had to accommodate back my family.
From Ondieki to Dr. Chibanzi Mwachonda at the front line of doctors' rights as the acting Secretary General of KMPDU. The virus spared none.
I didn't expect it at the time, but I also got COVID at a time when it was at one of the peak periods in the month of July going into August 2020. I understood fully the implications. At the time, we lost one doctor to COVID-19, and those are the things that were running through my mind in terms of, am I going to be a statistic? I had what you call moderate symptoms. It wasn't mild, it was moderate. Apart from the lungs and some episodes of difficulty in breathing every now and then, there was extreme fatigue, there was diarrhea, there was vomiting. So you can imagine all that. You're not able to retain what you eat. There was, of course, some mild fevers, headaches. Yeah, so I did spend a good number of the first 10 days basically in bed.
Contracting the virus gave Dr. Mwachonda more reason to want to bring change to the country's health system.
Of course, our healthcare financing remains a big challenge in our country. We're yet to attain the required financing percentages. We've seen countries that set up infectious disease hospitals, full-fledged infectious disease, like Ghana, where it was done within 3 months, 100 days. We are yet to see that in our country.
One of the systematic failures Dr. Mwachonda refers to is in critical care. The few critical care health workers became a valuable resource not many could access.
How are you? You're well?
I met Professor Wangari Sika, who heads the anesthesia department at the Aga Khan University Hospital last year.
I entered a room with a patient who was confirmed. I wasn't afraid, but I remember being highly aware of the fact that colleagues around the world in such situations had lost their lives. And I didn't take that lightly at all.
Being at such a high-risk area, at the front line with critically sick patients, some on their deathbeds, was a trying time for the doctors.
COVID, what has been different for a long time about it, is feeling a sense of helplessness for a long time, in that we didn't quite know what we needed to do to save a life.
At that time, there was very limited information on how to treat COVID-19 patients, and so were the ICU beds across the country.
In the past, where very often it's people in our parts of the world who are waiting for the West to give us guidance, all around the world, everybody was trying to find the answers to this question about what is the best way to take care of a patient, what therapies work, what doesn't work.
But the situation has changed, and for the better. Doctors like Wangari are more confident on what they know, what to do, and how to do it.
As our healthcare system continues to grapple with the challenges of less human resource, there are strides that have been made in fighting coronavirus. Thank you for watching. I am Beldine Walieula. I now hand you over to Dr. Mercy Korir for more. Dr.
Thank you, Beldine. The COVID-19 pandemic has seen Kenya lose more than 60 heroic medics. Today, we remember those who gave their lives and paid the ultimate price at the front lines.
16 doctors, 39 nurses, and 10 clinical officers.
65 of the known frontline healthcare workers who lost their fight to COVID-19. These were medics at various stages of their careers. Some were dawns, some had just started, some were settling in. They were parents and breadwinners, sons and daughters, friends and colleagues, each left a mark. Dr. Doreen Lugaliki, the young mother, an obstetrician and gynecologist with a career that was taking off, the first medic to succumb to the virus. Marian Awor, 32-year-old nurse from Rachuonyo, who never got to hold her baby and watch them grow. Charles Okoth Ochola, a senior clinical officer, a lung and skin specialist, and a former Nyanza TB coordinator. Dr. Ndambuki Mboloi, a consultant pulmonologist, a respiratory doctor working at the Kenyatta National Hospital. His last silent minutes still haunt his colleagues. Dr. Lawrence Karanja, a senior lecturer at the Jomo Kenyatta University for Agriculture and Technology, the pioneer chairman of the Department of Clinical Medicine in various colleges and universities, but to his family, Babasian. Professor Paul Kioi, 69 years old, consultant neurologist and an associate professor in clinical and basic neurophysiology. Professor Anthony Were, 64 years old, consultant nephrologist, head of the renal unit in Kenyatta National Hospital, deputy director of the East African Kidney Institute, president of the African Association of Nephrology, and a senior lecturer at the University of Nairobi. Madam Winnie Shena, 40 years old, nurse and the chief executive officer of the Kenya Obstetrical and Gynecological Society, a former National Nurses Association of Kenya president. Dennis Kipkemoi Mutai, 30-year-old nurse at the Kenyatta National Hospital. His smile is said to have been infectious. Dr. Andrew Njuguna, a father of 3, a dental surgeon. He worked as a civilian doctor and a dentist at the Defense Forces Memorial Hospital. Dr. Hudson Alumera, a dentist, a periodontal surgeon, a lecturer at the University of Nairobi, chairman of the scientific committee at the Kenya Dental Association, and a periodontist at Family Dental Center. Dr. Jacqueline Njoroge, a consultant physician at Thika Level 5 Hospital, a proprietor of Equity Afia in Thika. The last-minute call on social media to save her life is one that many still remember. Dr. Emara Ashraf, senior plastic and reconstructive surgeon. He restored people's smiles and worked at the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital in Eldoret. More than 3,000 other healthcare workers have contracted the virus, old or young, male and female. The coronavirus still snatched them while offering their services at the time they were needed the most. May their souls rest in peace. We now take a short break, but stay tuned for more on our special coverage, COVID at 1. My name is Dr. Mercy Korir. Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on our special coverage, COVID at 1. My name is Dr. Mercy Korir. Straight away, we join our reporter Cecilia Wakesho, who tells us about Kenyans' resilience in spite of the pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. Mercy. And indeed, although COVID-19 brought with it losses and economic disruptions, there are those who not only thrived, but also cashed in based on their quick ability to adapt to the new normal. In Nairobi's Marikiti market, business activities seem to have normalized in spite COVID-19 pandemic. One of the businessmen who have earned popularity in this market is John Odek, who is also an artist. Although he has been making a living through music, he decided to have a side hustle. In 2019, he started selling groceries in Marikiti market. He felt he had a lot of time when not performing. He was, however, forced to become more innovative in the business when coronavirus was first announced in the country.
Nikaenda nikafungua kitu kama kibanda Kileleshwa, kando ya kanisa Kileleshwa, kama unajua hapo Holy Trinity, hapo kando. Nikaanza kuuza Sunday fulani nikakuja nikaweka vitu zangu, sasa nikaweka nyanya nini na nini. Lakini sasa before sa corona nilikuwa nishaanza kufikiria nahitaji kutengeneza kibanda, but kabla tu nisimamishe hivi corona.
His income began to dwindle, but Odek had no choice but to look for an alternative source of income to fend for his family.
Katikati sasa nikakumbuka ile hustle yangu, ile biashara yangu ya mboga, sasa nifungue vizuri. Nikarudi tena kwa mtandao, nikakumbusha majamaa bado ile hustle naifanya ya kudeliver mboga kwa manyumba. Na kwanza sasa hivi kukawa na ile lockdown, president akafunga nchi, watu watoki, kaa nyumbani.
His Facebook and Twitter pages were the main way of meeting with his customers who are not only from the country but also abroad. With time, his clients began to earn his trust and believed in him. They only knew him as Baba Mboga.
Mimi nakutumia bili yako, unatumia pesa, naenda sokoni na kuletea. Katika hiyo hesabu kuna profit yangu, kwa sababu ni kazi ile nafanya na kuendea sokoni.
In Donholm Estate, Odek has just delivered some of the goods he had been sent. Thoroughly, he confirms that he has everything according to the shopping list. For the first time, he will be meeting face-to-face with a customer who lives in UK but has been ordering groceries delivered to their sickly father. Just a few days ago, this client flew into the country. Unfortunately, the father passed on a week ago.
Anatutumia bei, tunamtumia pesa, akaletea babangu hapa. Kwa hivyo ilimsaidia kwa hiyo wakati ya COVID, ati baba yangu hakukosa chakula.
Ugumu wa kushop ni kwa sababu sasa vitunguu utapata hapa bei nzuri, dawa karati hapa bei nzuri. Sasa kutembea utatembea kote, utachoka, tena kuna ile hofu ya utapata virusi. Lakini kwa Bwana John ni one stop shop.
Kuna siku naweza kuambia bila kuficha, kuna siku nilitengeneza 7,000 in profits.
A business that eventually saw an influx of business people. But Odek was already armed with a plan B. He had made enough at least to allow him open a fish joint. His new business, which he also does it on social media, is along Kiambu Road.
Hata watu wa huku Kiambu wanapenda samaki sana.
Unajua tulikuwa tunafuata samaki mpaka Gekomba, lakini tulifurahia sana venye walituletea hapa, maana samaki ni mzuri, ni white meat.
For now, Odek is back to his job as a performing artist. At the fish joint, he has employed a few individuals to assist him. He maintains, although the grocery business has gone down after some of the COVID-19 rules were lifted, he will still continue to deliver to his loyal customers.
And as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and those who adapted stayed afloat. Was it the same in the education sector? Shadrach Miti is up next with that answer.
Thank you, Cecilia. The education sector was among the worst hit. Learners were forced to take a 9-month break, and teachers had to find alternative blackboards. Following the outbreak of COVID-19 in December 2019, the government of Kenya, in a presidential address on 15th March 2020, ordered for the immediate closure of all institutions of learning. This one? Education in the country shifted from the traditional classroom setup and face-to-face learning. Then the Minister of Education, in line with the requirements of the Basic Education Act of 2013 on the provision of free and compulsory basic education, rolled out key interventions such as remote learning through various channels such as radio and TV broadcasts, YouTube and virtual lessons.
Hao watoto wa class 8 walijaribu sana. Walisoma na simu. Wakati wa kufungua shule tuliona hajaanguka, amefanya vizuri. Lakini hao wengine wote sio mzuri sana, kwa sababu hakuna mtu anasomesha nyumbani. Tunakaa, anaenda kuchunga, anarudi jioni.
The interventions by the government and other stakeholders, however, were plagued by numerous challenges such as poor internet connectivity and total lack of access to the same, especially among learners from low socioeconomic backgrounds.
A, B, D, F,
Inadequacy of ICT devices to facilitate online learning proved to be yet another challenge for most learners, parents and guardians.
Wengine mahali wanaishi hawakuwa na stima ambayo ingewasaidia kuweza kupata haya masomo yenye tulikuwa tunatuma through WhatsApp. Pia wazazi wengi kwa sababu hawakuwa na simu pia za touch yenye ingeweza kuwafanya waweze kupata haya masomo, hawakuweza kufanikiwa.
Pia kuna changamoto za mjazo kwa sababu kuingia kwa net lazima uwe na mjazo wa kutosha. Kwa hivyo ilikuwa ni changamoto nzima.
Public schools suffered the most, with many teachers and learners struggling to access content and learning devices. Learning assessment carried out in all primary schools immediately after reopening in 2021 to establish learners' entry behavior after the 9-month period away from face-to-face learning exposed huge learning losses and gaps due to long school closure.
Tulipofungua yale masomo ambayo tuliwapea kupitia kwa mtandao, wengi waliweza kuja na ile kazi ambayo tulikuwa tunawapea, walikuwa wanaenda wanatoleza kwa cyber, wanaweza kutuletea, tunasahihisha. Lakini pia 3/4 hawakuweza kupata haya masomo.
Unajua wakisoma, wakiangalia TV, hii masomo inarudi, inaisha, hawajaelewa venye ilikuwa inaenda. Sasa walikuwa tu wanapitia tu hiyo magumu. Ni kushika tu kidogo, ingine inapotea.
It was observed that majority of grade 4 and class 8 learners had greatly lost their proficiency levels. The performance gaps and the low proficiency levels reported were attributed to lack of face-to-face learning.
Na hii, umekatwa hii, umepata hii.
While low achievement in schools located in rural areas and counties located in arid and semi-arid areas was attributed to inadequate ICT devices and internet connectivity to facilitate remote learning during the closure of schools.
Hii ni zero. Ni zero. Na hii
hawajui kusoma na TV. Walizoea sana kusoma na mwalimu wao. Kwa sababu anatuma na simu, lakini hiyo simu mpaka uweke kredi kubwa kwa sababu anatumia sana.
On the other hand, the relatively high achievement levels reported among learners from private schools were linked to better access to remote learning compared to public schools.
And Kenya Private Schools Association is looking at the digital transformation as a key agenda to ensure that learners continue learning, teachers continue teaching, irrespective of whether learners are in school or at home, irrespective of whether teachers are in school or at home.
The COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent long closure of schools, which shifted to online and virtual classes, has ignited debate of whether it is high time learning shifted from the conventional classroom and face-to-face digital and online.
Huko ndio tunatakana tuelekee.
We are looking beyond just the 40 learners in a classroom, and we are looking at the 1,000 learners who can be able to join into the class and participate in the learning process within that digital environment.
Stakeholders have urged for more investment in digital development and power connectivity as the sure way towards successful remote learning.
7, 8, 9 unaandika hivi.
They have further urged the Ministry of Education to institute targeted interventions towards provision of learning resources in public schools, especially those located in rural areas, to enhance remote and blended learning.
Hebu andika tena.
We have no option than Kenyans, and education is a very expensive venture. It is upon Kenyans to look at this and prioritize education. And we need to have connectivity to our institutions.
The 9-month holiday also brought about changes in the school calendar as we knew it, as government seeks to ensure that learners make up for lost time. From education to rites of passage, let's now cross over to Nakuru County, where Ibrahim Karanja awaits with tales from delayed manhood.
Well, thank you, Miti. When time stopped on the education sector, it also did put a stop on some cultural practices. I take a look at some community and how the COVID-19 pandemic affected some critical rites of passage.
Over the years, the Bukusus have been known as a community that holds its tradition, especially circumcision rites, dear. The rituals conducted during the biannual events have attracted not only local tourists, but some have been traveling from outside Kenya's borders to witness as boys in their hundreds, accompanied by friends and family, walk along the streets before eventually undergoing the cut. But these gatherings and the large number of boys circumcised per season was a major source of concern for the government in 2020 at the height of COVID-19 infections.
This virus is very, very easy to spread. Can you imagine if you had a circumciser who is positive himself and goes cutting away 100 kids? Can you imagine the impact of something like that?
Tukaona ya kwamba mwaka huu hata tukitayarisha vijana wetu hatutakuwa na ugonjwa kwa wale ambao wataminya watoto.
With the community at crossroads, elders were torn between ignoring the Ministry of Health directives and conducting the rites, putting at risk thousands of lives, or suspending the activity until when it was safe, thus violating their culture. As deliberations were going on, some opted to do it differently. There were some, however, who continued with the century-long rite, leading to run-ins with law enforcers.
Tumetairisha watoto 28 hapa leo.
So those who might go carrying out circumcision with all sorts of gadgets and killing our children will be held completely and totally responsible.
According to their traditions, the Bukusus conduct circumcision ceremonies biannually and specifically on years ending with even numbers. And a pause of the exercise would therefore mean that the boys would wait until 2022. But as the Bukusu continued with a different approach, it was business as usual in areas of West Pokot and Tiati constituencies. Here, signs that Pokot boys had gone in their droves to be circumcised, despite the COVID-19 regulations, were abundantly clear in the empty classrooms come January 2021. For this community, there is an over 6-year difference between one circumcision season and the other. A delay of the exercise would mean the boys would have waited for at least 6 more years. Hidden in the bushes along the hills here, boys were undergoing teachings in strict conformity to cultural demands, yet in utter disregard of government protocols. In parts of central Kenya, a hybrid form of circumcision ceremonies has been taking place for years. A combination of both cultural rites and modern activities would over the years see tens of boys taken to a secluded area where cultural teachings would be conducted. This was, however, punctured in 2020. The pause on circumcision rites was not only witnessed at the community level. Churches, which have in the past decade taken over the exercise, also saw minimal activities. With gatherings at places of worship prohibited, some places of worship completely suspended the exercise.
Unfortunately, last year we were unable to do the rites of passage because of COVID. And as a church, that affected us because we had gotten used to mentoring an average of 60 young boys every year. This year, because of the regulations still and because of the change of the school calendar, we will not be able to do 60, but we will be targeting to do about 40 young boys in the month of March to April.
1 year on, and the country is still reeling from the aftershocks of the pandemic. Numbers have slowly but steadily started to rise again, and the fate of gatherings and other important cultural exercises remains unknown.
When COVID-19 struck, other ailments did not stop. In fact, as the number of patients in hospitals dwindled, some found time to sneak into neighboring Tanzania to get treatment. Mark Namaswa is up next with this story from Taita Taveta County.
Living in a county such as Taita Taveta brings its own fair share of dilemmas, especially if you have a medical emergency. You have to weigh your options between seeking for medical attention locally or crossing over the border and into Tanzania with the hopes of finding the best options available. In one of the neighborhoods in Voi town, we meet Hamisi Salmini. He is glad that in December 2020, he plucked the courage to venture into Tanzania, seeking treatment for a swelling in the neck that had troubled him for more than 10 years.
Nikawa najiuliza nini, mbona uvimbe haupungui unazidi?
Initial attempts to have the growth removed in Kenya had not succeeded. In December 2020, Hamisi did just what his neighbors and relatives often did, crossing over to Tanzania, where he believed surgery would cost less. At the time, the Holili border crossing was closed. He first tried his luck at the Tanga Referral Hospital, but the queues were too long. He ended up at the St. Augustine Muheza Hospital in northern Tanzania.
Wao ni service peke yake wanayotoa. Hawatoi dawa wala nini.
Hamisi figured out that it would cost him less in Tanzania than Kenya. The service charge for the operation alone cost him an equivalent of 7,500 Kenya shillings, an amount he reckons wouldn't have gotten him much in Kenya, where medics were on and off on strike. In Sofia area, Mwatate Tuamina Mwajuma Ali is a worried mother. Her 18-year-old daughter, Shaina Hamadi, has been battling a heart condition since early childhood.
Tukaenda Moi, tukiandikiwa dawa, akawa anaendelea hivyo hivyo. Kufikia miaka 8, akawa amezidiwa, hata shuleni kubeba bagi ni shida nini.
Tuamina and daughter have sought help at the Moi Referral Hospital, Voi, then a series of private hospitals in Voi and Mombasa without much success.
Sasa pale tukaandikiwa Kenyatta Hospital yafanyie operation. Tukawa hatuna uwezo. Kwanza alilia sana, akikosa matumaini ya kuishi.
She set her eyes on Tanzania, specifically the Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center, KCMC, in northern Tanzania.
Hawakuona ugonjwa wote hapo. Alikuwa nimeitishwa 100,000 apigwe scanning ile ya mwili mzima. Hiyo 100,000 nikaikosa.
After being advised to seek treatment in India, she feels stuck. Yet her daughter's weak heart cannot effectively pump blood. Medics say that Kenyans crossing over to Tanzania for medical attention is almost like a medical exchange program between the East African nations.
We refer to surgical cases or people who want some special attention.
While Kenya grappled with the Covid-19 pandemic, medics strikes and the scare it brought in 2020, hospital visits dropped. Data from Kenya's Ministry of Health for the last 5 years show fluctuations in the number of patients attending medical clinics and surgery from 2016 to 2020. The steady increase from 2016 dramatically dropped by 30% in 2020, from over 353,000 visits in 2019 to just about 242,000 visits.
There's a certain belief in this area that maybe hospitals in Tanzania will manage them better. The Tanzanians believe that we got better medicines than the ones they're having in Tanzania.
Though official borders in frontier zones like Taita Taveta were closed, Kenyans mastered the art of using alternative routes to sneak into Tanzania, mostly on motorbikes. Kenyans continue weighing their options, hoping they are making healthy choices across borders. Health continues to be the epicenter of this pandemic, but its shockwaves touch on other sectors. Brian George Otieno is up next with this story on how businesses took a hit.
Thank you, Mark. Just like the pandemic was a threat to the health sector, its containment measures like curfews and restrictions of movement were a threat to businesses. Penina Wairimu opens her butchery at 10 in the morning. She's still learning the ropes of the business. 2 months ago, this was a bar, but since January this year, it was converted into a butchery.
Kulipa hata rent kwa ni shida. Mwenye nyumba anataka pesa yake. Pia yeye ako na shida zake. So hataki kujua anataka pesa zake. So lazima toka kwa pombe.
The high costs associated with running the bar made it difficult for her to stay afloat. In an effort to make ends meet, she decided to only sell meat and other proteins.
Customers wenye ni moja wawili hivi. Kwa hivyo hata saa hii rent kulipa lazima fanye vitu tungine.
She would love to go back to the bar business since it's much more lucrative. Kasarani is a hot spot for bars, clubs and other entertainment spots. 32 of them have closed because of the pandemic, while others have converted them into other ventures such as gyms and eateries.
We rent, to pay electricity, to pay staff, to pay water, to pay the various around 5 licenses.
owners of the few that are still open say sales are low.
When we close the bars at 9 o'clock, and the curfew is there as well, so no one will come to the bar when there is curfew. Or when you leave out of the bar, then the police are waiting for you outside.
Last year, President Uhuru Kenyatta announced a stimulus package for the sector. Bars are finding it hard to access the funds due to the conditionalities set by the government. However, these are not the only businesses that have suffered after the shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a recent report from the Federation of Kenya Employers, majority of the organizations reported that less than 20% of their staff were working from home. 69% are finding it difficult to pay their employees, and 71% face challenges in paying other operating costs such as rent and utilities. Nearly 30% of small and medium enterprises experienced a loss of between 65 to 100%. Airlines also bore the brunt of the travel industry adversity, as some airlines closed completely while others had to be innovative in their craft.
And what we've done is to mitigate on those kinds of risks and downturns by introducing new products, new thinking.
Other sectors affected by the pandemic include textile and apparel, furniture and footwear. The virus never spared the logistics and supply chain industry either. With closed borders, little or no goods and services being transferred, it was hard for operators to ply their trade as there was a nosedive in the demand for logistics services. Finally, manufacturers equally felt the pinch of COVID as company overheads increased sharply.
At that time, China was pretty much on lockdown, so there was a slowdown in importation of raw materials, and that did slow down production, and then we saw markets starting to close.
And we hope that these businesses are going to recover soon. We now shift focus from the world of business into some sporting action, where men and women had hoped to make a mark in 2020 Tokyo Olympics and other major sporting events.
Thank you very much, Brian, for that. Now let's end this with what transpired in the world of sports. And as always, one man practicing sportsmanship is far much better than 50 who preach it. Sports is without a doubt one of the industry adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Billions of dollars lost as the global events were cancelled or postponed, with players being forced to stay at home. Let's start with the most significant one, the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games.
We agreed to postpone the Olympic Games, Tokyo 2020.
With concern rising in Japan that the Summer Olympics could be a hub for new coronavirus infections, organizers unveiled a preliminary plan aimed at protecting athletes and the visitors.
Majority, if not all, will follow the playbooks. However, we have, as you know, at the time of the games, a disciplinary commission, and if push comes to shove, we have to activate the disciplinary commission, then it will be done.
From 2020 to 2021, but this time out, there will be no cheering or singing, no handshake, no hugs or high five, no riding of public transport, not without a special permission at least. It will simply be a different Olympics year. Euro 2020 was expected to spice the football menu from June to July 2020. This, however, was not the case, as UEFA President Alexander Severin confirmed that the tournament, which was expected to be held in 12 cities across 12 UEFA countries, will be organized in 2021.
To think about football as a whole ecosystem of football.
Major football leagues across Europe came to a halt, with a number of games left before the season ended. The English Premier League, the Spanish La Liga, the Italian Serie A, the French Ligue 1, the German Bundesliga, and also the Champions League got the blow. In Kenya, Football Kenya Federation suspended all football activities, with Gor Mahia being crowned the champions. Athletics also got a big COVID-19 blow. Major marathons including Boston Marathon, New York Marathon, Berlin and also the Chicago Marathon were cancelled, while the London meet was postponed. Kenya's Timothy Cheruiyot took part in the first ever virtual athletics, dubbed the Impossible Games, at the Nyayo National Stadium against the Ingebrigtsen brothers in Norway simultaneously. As the year moved on, the sports world began the resumption phase, although without fans. Bundesliga, the Premier League, the Spanish La Liga, Serie A, and Champions League resumed behind closed doors.
Down the home straight and tit up.
Kenya too was not left out as the Nyayo National Stadium hosted the Kipchoge Keino Classic, the only continental tour event to happen in Africa.
In around 1506.
All in all, we saw some heartache and also some moment of resilience. It is 2021, and the reality is COVID-19 is still here with us. Wherever you are, keep it safe and make sure you adhere to the set guidelines. On behalf of everybody that has made this possible, my name is Moses Wahesi, and thank you for always keeping it KTN News.